Hey everyone, so hopefully you have gotten something out of these last few talks. As I mentioned previously, I'm the vocation director in the Archdiocese of Toronto, so a big part of my job is helping people discern or figure out what vocation the Lord has for them, what He's called them to, whether it be marriage, whether it be priesthood, or the consecrated single life. And I'll start by saying this, that when it comes to discerning a vocation, I think there's three categories of people. So there might be more, but I'm just going to go with three. So the first category are those who do not include God at all in any sort of discerning or decision-making process. Okay, so they might be atheists, they might be agnostics, maybe there's a God, I don't know. If there is, great, I hope He's nice, but regardless, I'm just going to go ahead and plan my life the way I see fit without consulting God, if He exists or at all even. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with this. It's not like these people are being arrogant. Most of us do this with our day-to-day decisions. You know, it's not like most of you consulted God on what color socks you wore today. So it's just describing the first category. It's probably the biggest category of people. So again, that category is those who don't consult God at all in any decision-making process. The second category are people who do believe there's a God and believe that He has power to influence reality, and they do include God in the decision-making process, but only in the following way. So these people will say, they'll ask God to bless and look favorably on whatever plans or whatever agenda they have for themselves. So here's an example. Let's just say a Christian person is thinking about becoming a doctor. Great. Nothing wrong with being a doctor. We need good doctors. And it's not easy to be a doctor because of the competition that's out there. So this person might pray and pray and pray, asking the Lord to bless their plans on becoming a doctor, regardless of whether or not God has actually called that person to be a doctor. So it's essentially treating God as a request granter. You know, so I'm gonna pray my novenas, I'm gonna go to Mass, I'm gonna go to confession. Basically, I'm going to be on my best behavior, hoping to impress God so that He might grant me my wish of becoming a doctor. So God is included in the process of choosing a vocation, but only as a type of genie in a bottle who grants our wishes whenever we say the right prayers. Okay? So that's the second category of people. Those who do acknowledge God, but and pray to Him, but only as a means of manipulating Him in order to get Him to see things their way. The third category of discerners are people who, right from the beginning of the process, say, Lord, what do you want me to do? I've got my own plans, and they might be yours too, but in the end, if those two plans differ, I only want to do what you want me to do, because I know that's what's going to make me happiest. So to use an image, these people they're like a piece of formless Play-Doh or formless clay, and they're handing that over to God and inviting God to mold them and to shape them into whatever shape He wants. So think of our Blessed Mother Mary saying, I am the servant of the Lord. Be it done to me according to thy word. Okay, so those are the three categories of people who discern. The first category, again, are those who don't include God in any discernment process at all. The second category are people who do include God in the prayer experience, but only as a way of praying, hoping to impress God, and God being impressed will now grant them their wish of becoming whatever they want. The third category are those who right from the beginning say, Lord, what is it you want me to do? Thy will be done in my life. Okay? And that's really the first step in discerning the will of God, is to get into that third category, to see yourself as a piece of formless Play-Doh or formless clay who right from the beginning asks God, Lord, I want to do what you want. I'm gonna allow you to shape me and to mold me. Because that's the truth, is that God has plans for you. If there's one lesson that's crystal clear in the scriptures, it's that God has a mission for everybody. And I don't mean a generic do-good mission, but a specific mission. A mission that you were given at your baptism. Now, how to figure out what that mission is, that requires a long process of prayer and sacraments and seeing a spiritual director. But I just want to give you a couple of tools now. I want to get really practical. I want to give you some tools on how to discern the will of God. And for this, I'm going to use the example of one of my favorite saints, Saint Ignatius of Loyola, who literally wrote the book on spiritual discernment. Okay? Saint Ignatius of Loyola, before he was a saint, was actually quite a vain and conceited person. And he cared about his own appearance way too much. So Saint Ignatius was a soldier in the Spanish army. And one day he was injured in battle from a cannonball. His leg became shattered. So he was forced to retire, and he had to have an operation. And back in those days, there was no anesthesia to fix his leg, so it was pretty painful. And just to show you, just to give you an idea of how vain Saint Ignatius was, Saint Ignatius asked to have 2 operations. So the first one to fix his leg, and the second operation was to fix I don't want to get all gross on you, but anyways, after the first operation, his leg was all bent and out of place, and he thought it was ugly. So he asked to have a second operation just to straighten out his leg, so purely for aesthetic reasons. So he was quite vain. But during his time in the hospital, in the convent, where he was convalescing, he got really bored. And he asked the nurse, or the sister who was in charge, to give him some books to read. That's all they had back then was books. And in the hospital, they only had 2 types of reading material. So the first set of books were stories of being brave and chivalrous and winning over the ladies. Okay, so I'll call these knight in shining armor stories. The second set of material that they had was spiritual material. So the lives of the saints and the life of Christ, and I think there was a Bible as well. So nowadays, think of it as, on the one hand, having a Netflix account, and on the other hand, having access to spiritual talks, by like Father Mike Schmitz or Bishop Barron or something like that. And St. Ignatius said he only read the spiritual material after consuming all the Netflix kind of stuff, all the knight in shining armor stuff. So he would binge read that stuff, and then only after consuming that, going to the spiritual material. And here's what's interesting. He discovered that both types of material delighted him. Okay, so that's the word he uses. It delighted him, but in a very different way. And this difference would be his most defining moment in his life. So he said that when he thought about being a knight in shining armor, impressing the ladies, he discovered that brought him a sense of delight. But that delight, almost immediately afterwards, left him when he put those thoughts aside. It left him, and he ended up feeling empty. Now, when he read the Bible and the lives of the saints, he said he also felt a sense of delight. But after putting those books aside, after closing the book on those things, he said the sense of delight he had stayed with him. It lingered with him. Whereas the thoughts of being a knight in shining armor, that gave him a sense of delight, but it disappeared almost immediately after he closed the book. Whereas when he read the Bible and the lives of the saints, that delight lingered. So the difference was the length of time before the feeling of delight disappeared. When he thought about being a knight in shining armor, that delight only lasted as long as the thoughts lasted. But when he read the lives of the saints and thought about imitating them, he said that he felt a delight that would not go away. It would linger, sometimes the whole day. And so little by little, St. Ignatius began to apply that observable difference to all of his experiences. And by doing this, he was able to discern which pleasant thoughts were from God and which pleasant thoughts were not of God. So the thoughts that were of God, they gave him a sense of delight that lingered. Whereas the thoughts that were not of God gave him a sense of delight that didn't last and ended up making him feel empty almost immediately afterwards. So that's a tool that he applied to all his experiences. And it's a very helpful tool because, as you know, or you might not know, but the evil one likes to mimic God. And so certain pleasurable, certain delightful experiences could very well be of God, but they could also be very well of the evil one. And so this tool of noticing the type of delight can be a good tool in discerning which delightful experiences are of God and which are not. You know, when I was in university, I studied kinesiology and health sciences. And there was a time that I wanted to do different things in being in kinesiology. I wanted to be a coach. I wanted to be in geriatrics. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to get into physiotherapy, all these different things. And thinking about all these things would give me various degrees of delight. But one thing I noticed is that that delight didn't last very long. It's like St. Ignatius said, the feelings of delight that I got, they passed as soon as I stopped thinking about coaching or geriatrics or traveling with a sports team. But when I thought about being a priest, and I would never admit this as, when I was 20 years old, but when I thought about being a priest, that gave me a sense of delight and fulfillment that would not leave me. Even when I wanted it to leave me, even when I wanted not to be at peace with the thought about being a priest, it would stick with me. It's as if God was doing his best to get through to me, and he eventually did. Okay? So that's one tool you can use as a rudder in helping you steer through the different decisions you have to make, is the type and the length of delight that's associated with certain experiences. Now, here's something I want you to notice. This is very important. Okay? So being a coach, being in geriatrics, or being a physiotherapist, these weren't bad things. They were good things. But after a time of prayer and discernment, I discerned that it wasn't good for me. A thing can be good for you. It can be good, like being a doctor. We talked about this before. Being a doctor is good. But is it good for you? Is it what God has planned for you? And so the tool that I just outlined for you, that St. Ignatius just outlined for you, can help you navigate through whether or not a certain pleasurable experience is of God and whether it's not of God. Okay, so it's a tool that works, but the challenge is finding time to test it out. Here's another tool that St. Ignatius gives in helping a person discern what their vocation is. He says that if the thought of doing something, if the thought of, let's just say, going on a mission trip, the thought or notion is likely of God when that thought is accompanied by a feeling of coming home or coming through the door of your childhood house, or maybe the house you live in now if you've lived in it for a long time. There's something heartwarming or peaceful about the thought of returning home. And it's no wonder why, because homes, especially if there were places of authentic growth and development and support, they're gifts from God. So homes are on God's side. So if a certain thought or an idea of a vocation is accompanied by that feeling of coming home, chances are it's of God. And conversely, if a thought or a feeling or an idea is accompanied by a feeling of venturing away from home, chances are it's not of the Lord. Now, I have to be very careful in saying this because it does not mean we're not called to go out in an adventure. It's not as if God wants to make us stay at home and stay safe. That's not what it means. God obviously wants us to go out of ourselves and go on an adventure. This is what evangelization is. It's an adventure. But here's the thing. Certain adventures feel like they're ones we ought to take on. And certain adventures are ones that we merely just choose for ourselves. In other words, certain adventures fit like a good home, while other adventures are ones that don't. And they can end up causing us feeling a sense of alienation. Okay, so there's more that I could say about this, but I'll leave it there. So just in summary, if you want to discern properly, begin by seeing yourself as that piece of unmolded clay. And just give yourself over to the Lord and say, Lord, what do you want me to do? That's the first and most important step. Secondly, try St. Ignatius's lingering delight test. So where does your delight linger, and where do you feel you need to prop it up artificially? So that the type of delight that lingers, even without you trying, is likely of God. Whereas the type of delight that quickly fades away, and it's almost like you need to put energy into keeping that delight, that level of delight up, likely those are not from God. Third tool, go with whatever makes you feel like coming home, or what fits like a childhood house. Ultimately, don't be afraid to do what the Lord is calling you to do. It might seem tough. It will be tough, and it will demand a lot of sacrifice. But if you accept and embrace it, you'll be giving God the greatest glory, as well as bringing about the max amount of good in the world around you.
me.